do the recording. Okay, so I was just about to say, as a quick reminder, as all of our sessions are, they are recorded. And if you are having any issues from a sound perspective or logging in, they will be available on our website for those of you who are having any issues. Okay, so logistics. Your hosts for today, we've got myself, David Donaldson, and we've got a new host, Catherine McKernan. Lauren Connor has gone to pursue other interests, so we wish her all the best in her new job. We're actually really sad that she left, but anyways, we've got Catherine, who's awesome, and we're gonna have great fun today. Sound and technology, if you're having any issues, please just pop into the chat box there and fire a quick note. Catherine's gonna be monitoring that for us. And we find that sometimes the sound is a little bit slow and sort of, takes a few moments to catch up. So, be patient and it should appear. Under our new software, if you look at the top of your screen, you should see a little icon that looks like a little person raising their hand. And what you can do there is you click on it, you'll have a bunch of options now to raise your hand, agree, disagree, etc. And we're going to be monitoring that. So if you do have a question or something. Off to the side, just below my webcam, you'll see that there's a chat. That's just a general chat thing, so you can pop in and just do a simple hi, or if you have a comment or something like that. Below at the bottom, you'll see that you have question parking lot, and that's for if you have any particular questions that you would like addressed. Again, Catherine's going to monitor that for us and make sure that those are raised. We do interactive sessions as always, so when you see this image pop up, it is time for you to talk, and we'll be using both answer questions and polls and things like that. Okay. And of course, we always accept applause. All right. Our opening thought for today, and I got this from Marcel Marceau. Music and silence combine strongly because music is done with silence and silence is full of music. And I really was reflecting back on this quote when putting this session together and thinking how apropos. Here we have multiple different elements. We've got cost, we've got time, we've got schedule, resources, scope, all these different pieces, and they all have to combine and work together, much like music and silence. And it's not the notes that's the music, but it's the silence and the notes together that really creates that magical moment of music. So it's really, that combination of the two, and that's what integration is all about. So I'm going to pose the first question here. Space for you at the bottom to answer the question. And the question is very simply this: what does integration mean to you? So just pop down to that area at the bottom of your screen and answer that question. What does integration mean to you? See some people are typing. I'll give you a few moments to answer that. Just give that a few minutes. Oh, I'm getting stuff coming in fast and furious here, which is great. That's better. Okay. Mark, having all the parts coming together, common event, task, or goal. Eleanor, merging two processes. Eleanor, if you could expand on that a little bit. I'm interested to what you mean by just two processes. Mashing the multiple pieces, or meshing, sorry, meshing the multiple pieces, merging two concepts together, so integration, bringing them together, beautiful, love it. Integration means making different components work together in a system. Interesting, I like it. Julie, very succinct, synergy, love it. Collaborating, blending the different things, connecting different systems, absolutely. So what we're going to do is take a look at today is 3 areas of integration, because when I look at integration, and this is one of those areas where I think we sometimes miss the boat a little bit. There's integration within the project, because when we talk in terms of integrations, are we getting the timeline and the cost and the various pieces together? There's also integration within the product. And we saw that in a couple of those answers with the whole concept of let's bring the multiple parts and elements together. The third area of integration we want to consider is integration within the environment. So do we have that resulting product getting integrated back into the environment together so that not only what we built is actually good, but it actually works within the environment that we're working within. So when we talk in terms of integration within the project, we have many different elements: our work breakdown structure, our schedule, our S-curve, cost timelines, all of these kind of factors. And really, we kind of boil it down to very simple, that classic triangle diagram. The time, the cost, the scope, and how is this all coming together so that we've got this integrated approach to it. And when we look at that in more detail, let's break that down into some detail. We start with the scope. What's in, what's out. All of our project planning really drives out of this. Now, we're talking integration here. Something I really didn't include in here is where does the scope come from? And we've had that discussion in previous webinars around the whole concept of connecting back to the why. Why are we doing this? So that we make sure that we get the right elements and make sure that we've got the right scope in there. So our scope, we then take that and we break it down. So we figured out what all the pieces are, we break it down. We're now getting into activities. So we're breaking that down, subdividing deliverables into subdeliverables, subdividing those into smaller deliverables until we eventually get down to down to the activity level. That activity level, we then sequence it. We're also going to resource it. We've got to figure out who are the players involved. Now that we've figured out the players, we can feed that back into our sequencing. And when we put that into the sequencing, we can now have more accurate estimates. We can know how long it's going to take. Our resources are also going to help us with figuring out that work breakdown structure and figuring out that sequence, what can be done first, what can be done second, and so on. We're then going to take all of that data and turn it into a schedule. And the schedule turns into our S-curve as we layer our costing on top of that. And of course, our resources are going to have a pretty significant impact or input into that. Now, when we look at bringing integration together, we can't have this discussion without talking about risk and communication. 80–90% of what you do as a project manager is you communicate. That's where you spend the majority of your time. So we want to think about that, and risk is so far-reaching that we want to make sure that we're thinking about risk in all of these other areas. So we look at that and think, okay, well, what's in, what's out in scope, that's going to affect our communication. Our communication is going to affect the scope. What's happening from resourcing, from work breakdown structure, from scheduling, and so on and so on and so on, right? So risk and communication really layer on top of all of that. And we need to make sure that what we're doing is taking those into account and impacting those or influencing those other areas back into those worlds and making sure that all of the parts are working together. So let's take a minute and talk a little bit about product integration. Now, putting this together, I thought I'm going to come up with a very iconic vehicle here to use as our analogy. And what we're looking at is the Volkswagen Beetle. And this is an art installation. It's one that's been effectively exploded to all its component parts. Now, let's think about this for a second. Here's a product that started in 1938, and the version 1, which is what we're looking at, actually ceased production in 2003. I went to do a quick bit of research on this. I was like, what, 2003? That's a 65-year run for an essentially unchanged product. They made over 21 million of them. A very iconic vehicle, very much a staple of the roadways internationally. So we think about that, and then we look at these parts, and take any one of these parts individually: a single wheel, a door handle, the trim around the headlight, and the individual piece on its own is useless and doesn't do anything. But when it's combined together into the larger product and when it's integrated properly, then it works, and we have this amazing result. So we think in terms of projects and what we're doing and all the pieces that we build. And perhaps our specialty, our corner is, the rubber that wraps around those wheels on the, on the four corners there. And that's all we do, right? On its own, it's nothing. But when we combine it together with everything else, we create some real magic. We want to be thinking about that in terms of the product that we're creating, how we're doing our project plan, and making sure that not only are we creating a good overall product, individual pieces wise, but we're making sure that those products and parts integrate back into the larger picture, and then they all work together. We put this into a software perspective. I'm writing 4 or 5 modules of software. Do they all integrate with each other? Do they talk to each other? Um, you know, is that working? Is the one part working with the other? Perhaps we're doing a business process reengineering, and we've got some business process elements that are going to support, the process that we're going to do. So, do my templates align with the process that we've developed, and factors like that. We then want to start thinking about how are we going to run this, integrate this within the larger environment. Now, again, back to our analogy of the car. So we've now built this car. It runs, it works, but will it integrate into the environment? So if we built a car that was too big, too small, even consider things like safety standards. So if we want to introduce this in the North American market versus the European market versus the South American market, what does that look like? What are the standards? Do we need to have seatbelts? Do we need to have, signal lights and so forth? I mean, when the Beetle first came out, they didn't have signal lights. That concept wasn't really invented yet. So there was this little arm that popped up on the side of the car. And when you're driving it, you'd kind of pull this little lever and this arm would pop up. This arm would pop up literally out of the side of the car to say, hey, I'm turning, right? And then that got replaced with the signal lights. So we need to make sure that whatever we're building, that product, even all the elements that integrate together to make the product function and behave, will that product now work within the environment that it's intended to work within? As simple as left-hand drive, right-hand drive. So putting that into a more business context, let's think about this. We're going to, again, do that software project. We're building that new software. We're now going to roll that software out into our environment. Does it work within our environment? Have I built Mac software? I'm trying to integrate that into an IBM environment. This simple things like that. From my experience in working with software projects, I've actually seen environments where that new piece of software that we tried to roll out went and reached out and shut down other pieces of software and made them stop working. So, what does that look like? And this is why we do those levels of testing. Will that new business process that we've done in those templates, will they work within the environment? We were just having a conversation just before we started today about doing business in Europe and doing business in English versus in Spanish or French or Italian or whichever environment that you're in. Will it work? Will it be accepted? Is that environment able to deal with that thing in that way and that it's built? So we're then going to take that whole concept of what we build, integrating all of the pieces together, and will it now work within the environment that it's intended to be used within? So this comes back to a question of focus. And I'd like to pose this question. What should we focus on? And I'm just going to pop the question open there. Okay. And I'd like you to take just a few moments and answer the simple question. What should we focus on? So it looks like we got a bunch of people typing, so just go ahead and answer that question. What should we focus on? Okay, we're getting a bunch of answers coming in. Jason, cost and time. Absolutely. We've got to make sure that we're delivering within the timelines and within the cost, but we also want to make sure that we're not hyper focusing on those. Seeing a number of ones coming in around the need and the why. So Megan's saying the why, Marina's saying, focusing on the need, Julia on the goal. And when we talk about the goal, we then get into that question of, is it the what is the goal? Is the goal the product and the thing, or is the goal really to answer the need? And it's an interesting distinction between the two, because we do really need to focus on the end result and the product service, as a couple of you have said, like delivering the product, delivering that goal. But we get into this scenario where we're delivering the car, we're delivering the product, the thing, and we've lost sight of the reason why. And that can really be problematic from the standpoint of, we end up delivering a product that doesn't meet the need. Ali just chimed in right near the end there. Stakeholder expectations while aligning to the goal. And really good point, because the first answer out of the gate today was the classic, time and cost, right? Totally very important, absolutely. But if we focus on time and cost only at the expense of focusing on the goal, at the expense of focusing on, the needs and what we're trying to deliver here, we can kind of set ourselves up a little bit here. So we got to be cautious of that. Now, having said that, we do have to work within the realities of life, which is, we have limited resources, we have often limited time frames. What I want to do is make sure that we're tempering that with what is the bigger picture. And this is kind of that underlying theme of integration, which many of us, or some of us, guilty as charged, have missed. Because what we'll do is we get so focused on delivering on time, on budget, that we kind of lose the point of the whole thing. And keeping it aligned with what the stakeholder is expecting, but also making sure that what we're delivering is aligned with solving that need, solving that problem. That is really what is driving the project. We talk in terms of project management, and we're always talking in terms of processes and deliverables. But let's make sure that whatever that deliverable is actually aligns with what is being expected, and more importantly, aligns with actually delivering to a need that's going to have a resulting benefit to the organization. Okay, so some really good answers here, folks. I'm really liking this. Oh, sorry, there's my icon. All right, so our next question is very simple. What do we focus on? So previously I asked you, what should we focus on? Now I'm asking, what do we focus on? And as a secondary to that, why? I'll just give you a few moments to give you a couple more moments to type in some answers. All right. Julie, love it. Profit, got to make money. Yep. Now, that is, I'm going to guess you're in private sector, not public sector. That is a very good answer, and I really do like that, because the reality is we need to make money. And when we look in terms of integration, when we think about some of the processes that are there, which we're going to be looking a little bit more detail in a few moments. Our first one out of the gate is the charter, and its purpose is to justify the expense. Now, something that I've done in my world, and I do highly recommend and profess, is replace the word budget with the word investment. And the reason for this is, if you think of this in terms of you're going to your senior management, you're going to your stakeholders, your sponsor, and you're saying, I would like budget approval. Imagine you're going to them and you're saying, I would like you to invest. And think about the response that they're going to get. Well, what's the return on my investment? And if you're not providing a return on the investment, it's not a good project. So we want to make sure that while we deliver goals and define our deliverables and deliver those deliverables and do them within timelines and within budgets and so forth, we want to make sure that there is a resulting benefit to the organization. And this is part of what we're talking about when we talk about integration, because we're integrating the resulting product back into the environment. So imagine, if you will, we've just finished spending $2 million, we've created some new software, and that software doesn't work and we can't get it working within the environment, so we shelve it and don't use it. Thinking we're probably going to have some pretty unhappy stakeholders at this point. So, we've got to be able to use that and, deliver what the client expects, absolutely, but we also got to, make that money. Now, Danielle put in to ensure success. And this is a bit of a problematic one, because the question now becomes, what is success and how do we measure that success, right? So yeah, we need to kind of think about that, and we also get into the secondary conversation around one person's perception of success via another way, right? And Lisa, sometimes budget sometimes at the impact to the value 100%, because if we're doing, especially in a for-profit scenario where we're creating this product that we're going to sell, it's now the net gain that we're going to get, right? And we definitely want to look at that. We're going to talk a little bit more detail on that as we go. Being realistic on what we can achieve while maintaining those costs and things, absolutely great place to focus. I'm always a big fan of being realistic. Marina, successful delivery and value add, totally agree. We need to be focusing on value add, right? Time and cost, that's what the upper level management is looking. And I'm going to just modify that one slightly and just ask you the question, what's upper level management's looking at, right? Now, as much as they will look on a tactical basis from a time and cost perspective, they're also going to be looking longer term. So if you deliver on time and on budget, in that time and cost piece, but we're not providing a resulting benefit back to the organization, while you might get a short-term success, you're not going to get long-term. So we got to be careful where we focus. And I love Matt's answer here. Typically, we focus on the product. We work sequentially rather than looking back at the fundamental needs as we go. And that's some really good wisdom there, Matt. So thank you for providing that. That's really good. So Danielle just put in there, she works in education. So I ask that question a lot around, to ensure success, 100%. Yeah, because, being also in education, it's, we're providing a product and we're not getting, we're not producing that result. Absolutely. All of this, we do have to consider our timelines and our budgets, et cetera. So we need to make sure that we are delivering, within acceptable parameters. So I'm not suggesting in any way that you should be doing this without, providing that piece. But the reason I wanted to, pose these questions today is I wanted us to think about this, because when we look and ask the question, what should we focus on, and then we ask the question subsequently, what do we focus on? Sometimes get two different answers, and really those two answers should be aligned. And we look at the why, and I think there's some great answers there when we talk in terms of this is what senior management's looking for. This is where we're being driven. We're down in the weeds. We're getting tactical, and we can lose sight of that. And then there's the classic old, you lose sight of the forest for the tree. So we now start to get into that whole concept of, are we looking at the forest? Are we looking at the trees? And as PMs, we're forced to look at the trees. We're forced to look at the individual leaves because that's our job. But while we're doing this, we need to retain that focus, that what I like to call situational awareness. Where we're at, where we're going, why we're going there. And it actually makes our job a lot easier because when we do retain that larger awareness, you're going to get a lot of direction from that. If I can retain that back underlying need, it makes your decision making much easier. So when I ask the question, what do we focus on? And if we look at this kind of a little bit more from a sort of neuroscience perspective, we focus on what's interesting. And what's interesting to us is pictures. In fact, moving pictures are far more interesting than non-moving pictures. So right now, I'm guessing all of you just focused on that smiley face to the right that just did the little dance around the screen. That is absolutely normal and natural. And this is kind of a simplistic way of illustrating the whole squeaky wheel syndrome. The squeaky wheel gets the oil. So want to ask yourself, who are the squeaky wheels on your project? Are they key decision makers? Are they the important folks that you should be focusing on versus, it just happens to be a squeaky wheel, right? And this is a great conversation to have around the concept of risk management because we sometimes get distracted by a small issue and we'll let the bigger side of the things kind of go off track here. We've got that minor little issue that's really not that consequential, but it's making a lot of noise, right? Noise in air quotes. It's making a lot of noise and driving our attention. So what we end up doing is we start focusing on that and potentially at the risk of losing sight of kind of the larger picture status. This concept is known as division. Now, our brains are self-limiting mechanisms. We can only really focus on one thing at one time. This is why texting and driving will never work, right? So when we're working on a project, we focus on the task, then we shift our focus to the next one, and this concept is called channelized attention. Now, when we have a task that's drawing our attention, because it's being a squeaky wheel, we're going to focus on that. So let's make sure that as PMs, we are retaining kind of that bigger, higher level view where we're kind of, that overview of the whole project. This is why as a PM, when you start working as a team member, you roll up your sleeves, you take your PM hat off, you put your team member hat on, and you start working and, doing part of the project. It's a very dangerous situation to be in because now you're focused on that task and you've lost focus of the entire project. And your project's technically adrift, which is okay in short periods. We need to be cautious of that, but we also want to be very aware and cognizant that that is actually what's going on at this point. Now, here's the really annoying part. This concept of channelized attention and division, it's actually amplified by fatigue and stress. So this is where, our ability to multitask gets reduced when we're tired, when we're stressed, and that's when oftentimes we need to be at our best. So, if you can think of that scenario where the project's going off the rails, you're running into all kinds of problems, you're getting over budget, you're getting behind, you've got people mad at you, you're having to switch that status from green to yellow to red, and now you're going, right, so the stress is increasing, you're working harder, you're working longer hours, the fatigue is increasing. And I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but it's really easy to see when you're driving. You start making silly little mistakes like drifting out of your lane when you go and change the radio station or things like that. This is what fatigue and stress are going to do, right? You're going to miss key things. You're going to miss that meeting that you're supposed to be at, and things like this when you get fatigued and stressed. Because what's happening is your brain is losing its ability to multitask. Now, multitasking is actually a myth. What we do is we switch from one task to another. But when we do this, it takes more energy, it takes more attention. So it is a little bit of a more difficult thing to do. Okay. So we're talking about the 10 knowledge areas, which is a very PMBOK-y topic. So let's dive into PMBOK. Now, in the world of integration, there are 6 processes. And interesting thing with this area, those 6 processes are actually through all 5 process groups. So we start out over here with the charter. And your charter is all about, should we do this project, yes or no? Does it make sense? If the answer is yes, we move into the second piece, which is develop our project management plan. And here we're looking at what are all the pieces, how do we make that work? We're going to go into a little bit more detail on that in a moment. From the plan, we now move down into direct to manage project work. So this is the plan the work the plan, right? So now that we know what we're going to do. While we're doing all of that, we're going to be monitoring and controlling our project work and performing integrated change control. And then finally, we move down to here to closing the project or phase. So kind of an interesting way to open our series of 10 because we're actually looking at the entire project from start to finish. The charter at the very beginning, develop the plan, work the plan, close the project or phase down. Now, we could spend hours on all of this. What I decided is I would follow my own advice and focus. So we're going to focus in on 3 of the processes today, the first of which is develop project management plan. And it's kind of looking at what would make the most sense for us to do, right? And then monitor and control project work and perform integrated change control. So that's where our focus is going to be today. We're going to move into develop project management plan. And I'm sure many of you have seen this. You ask someone for what is your project management plan, and they give you a Gantt chart. Well, I hate to say it, folks, Gantt chart is not a project management plan. The project management plan is more than just the schedule. The Gantt chart is a fantastic tool, and it shows you what's happening on day 1, on day 2, on day 3, and day 5. It shows where there's overlaps, where there's float. Fantastic tool. Love it. I think if we're going to say, here's a single piece, this is going to be one of the primary, most important single pieces. And there's so much stuff that layers on top of this. It is really a foundational piece for a project plan, but it is not the plan, okay? The plan is actually a number of subplans. So if we're going to do this properly, what we really want to do is we want to have a bunch of subplans. And those subplans would include things like the scope management plan, the schedule management plan, the cost management plan, the quality management, and so on and so on and so on and so on. Now, it's kind of ironic because if you look at all of these, that's actually our list of 10 knowledge areas, right? So we have integration, then scope, cost, schedule, and so on. And when we're looking at, what makes up the project management plan, it's really all of those subplans put together. Now, there are more than just the knowledge areas because we also have things like our requirements management plan, our change management plan, and there are some others. And basically what we're saying here is you've got to look beyond just when are certain things being done. So within our scope management plan, how are we going to manage that scope? What is the scope? How are we going to manage those requirements? It's kind of very tightly tied with scope. How are we going to manage that? How are we going to handle if there's a change to scope or if a particular item's not working, things like that. How are we going to manage our schedule? How are we going to manage our costs? How are we going to manage our quality and so on? And the questions that you're really asking here are, what are the tools I'm going to use? Who's going to do what? So we're into ownership, we're into resourcing, and you want to really kind of think through how each of those is going to progress and be taken care of during your project. So I'm going to pose this sort of hypothetical question here. Are you building a kayak or are you building a tall ship? And with that in mind, I want you to think about what your project plan would look like if you were going to build a kayak, right? Nice simple little boat. There's really no moving parts. It's going to take you about 100 hours to build, okay? Then I want you to think, and it's just you as well, right? This is just a little, garage project. Then I want you to think about what it would take to build this tall ship. Now, this is a 100+ foot long ship. The hull is made of steel. I can't remember how many tons it was. There's 3 masts, actually. You can't see the third one. It's kind of hidden in the back there. lots of sails, lots of rope, lots of complexity. There's mechanical systems. There's tons of moving parts. There's engines. There's generators. There's sleeping quarters. There's ventilation systems. We're talking a big build here. So with that in mind, I want you to think about your integrated plan. Now, the integrated plan, cost, schedule, quality, HR. You're building a kayak, you've got one person, right? It's a nice, easy build. It can be done in your garage. You can pretty much do it solo. Maybe you need a second pair of hands for one or two little pieces to, deal with that. We're talking a 12-foot boat versus something that's well over 100 feet long. I think this boat was actually around 150 feet. It's a three-masted tall ship from Russia. And, what's going to take that, right? So we're now into a team of 50, 100, 200 people with specialties and sub-teams and communication. And this is going to take probably 2 years to build versus, your kayak, which is going to take a couple months. Now's the time we want to be scaling it up, right? So when we look at this whole concept of, how to manage a project, when we talk in terms of integration or any of the knowledge areas for that matter, you need to scale it up and scale it down to what makes sense, right? The budget for the kayak, $500, $600, something like that. The budget for the tall ship, if we're building it today, we're probably talking 500,000, maybe even $1 million or $2 million. I have no idea. I'm not a naval architect. I just build kayaks. So you want to scale this up and down, right? So when I was building that kayak, I didn't do, a fancy HR plan or a communications plan. I still had the essence of them there, but I didn't really, formalize them out, right? I had a bit of a timeline in mind. Yeah, but I didn't, really create fancy Gantt charts and all that kind of stuff. Now, I could have done all that. But how would that have benefited the project? Would it have gotten it done faster? Would it have gotten it done more to budget? I had enough of a plan there to know what was going on, and it was communicated to my stakeholders. Okay, so that's my lovely wife, who's the main stakeholder in that project. So, we make sure that we're scaling this up and down to what makes sense. Okay, if we're building that tall ship, lots of moving parts, lots of specialties, big team, big dollars on the line, right? So we want to make sure that we are doing this very much at a level that makes sense. I'm going to move on to monitor and control. So when I looked at these processes, which ones do I want to focus in on? And monitor and control is a key one. So monitor is watch. And I always look at monitor and control as bookends. Watch what's going on. See the issues that are there. And control is fix. Take corrective action. So the question I'm going to pose to you for reflection is, what instruments have you installed in your project to give you indications that there's an issue? Do you know that something is actually going off the rails, or are you kind of oblivious, right? I had this question from a student one time in one of my classes. They said, how come my project is on budget till about the last 10% or so, and then suddenly it goes over? My answer was simply this. It was over the entire time. You just didn't know it, right? So when we're looking at that monitor and control, what have you installed as instruments to give you indications that tell you whether you're on track or not? And are you getting a real good indication? We'll explore that in a little bit in just a moment. The other one that I wanted to briefly talk about was perform integrated change control. And this is a fascinating one in my mind because, guilty as charged, but we've all done this. We've been asked to increase the scope, right? And increase scope quality, okay? And of course, we've already got our timelines and budgets set, right? And of course, we can't have any more time or any more budget. No, that would be just not right. So we're asked to then deliver more scope quality within the same timeline or within the same cost. So the question that I have is how does that make sense? Because if I'm increasing, if I have a net new ask, and we had this on a project one time. We were putting together a training program for a customer. We put together the materials, the books, the binders. We put together the instructor materials. We were delivering the training, and they came back to us and said, "Well, we want a quick reference guide, right? And by the way, we don't want to spend any more money, and we want it delivered on time." We're like, "But this is a net new ask. I mean, this wasn't part of the original scope. This wasn't part of the original plan. So the way we handle those sorts of situations, and I've many, many times over the years had similar type situations, my answer is always the same. Yep, we can do that. Now here's the amount of time and the amount of cost it's going to take. Now, are you willing to, pony up the resources to, to add that scope and that quality to the overall project? And this is what integrated project change control is all about. So it doesn't matter where the change came from, whether it came from time because there was a delay for whatever reason, okay, whether the cost went up. We've recently had our dollar go kind of south, and now all of those things that we're acquiring from south of the border have just gone considerably up, or vice versa. If we're doing work south of the border, we're actually getting a benefit right now, where we're charging in U.S. dollars. Perhaps a risk occurred. So it doesn't matter where the change starts from. It matters that the change now gets integrated into the whole project. And let's run the scenario of a delay. Okay, so we've had a delay. The actual reason for the delay is kind of secondary, but we've had a delay. And we've got Joe scheduled to start July 1st. Now, we re-timeline our project based on this delay that we've occurred, and we realize we have to push everything back 1 month, which means I don't need Joe on July 1st. I need him on August 1st. Well, if we think about this for a second, wouldn't it be wise to let Joe know now before July 1st comes around? Because if we don't update our project plan, if we don't update our timeline, if we don't update our communication, if we don't update our HR, well, Joe's not going to know. He's going to show up on July 1st, not have anything to do. Now, how's that going to impact our cost? Well, if I have Joe show up as commissioned on July 1st and I don't have anything to do for him, well, I'm probably paying that bill. And then I've got to pay a second bill when he comes back in August 1st. That's assuming he's even available. Because if he's not available August 1st, I want to know that now. Now, being almost the beginning of June, we're almost there. What is it? No, it's not June 1st yet. So beginning of June, we've got a whole month before he's supposed to arrive, 2 months, to August. So we can now get into the question of, is he available now? I book him now. I can make that adjustment potentially with no penalty, versus I wait till the last minute. I have to pay a penalty for cancellation. I may have to pay a premium to get him on short notice. All these kinds of things. So when we look at perform integrated change control, it's about taking that change wherever it started from. So if that change started in time, I'm going to then integrate it into cost. I'm going to integrate it into my risk. I'm going to integrate it into my scope, right? So perhaps I'm scheduling some of my work to happen in, let's say, August, so that I reduce weather risks on my project, and it gets pushed to November or December, right? So now we need to think about, okay, we need to update our risks now, because based on a change in the timelines, and maybe the cost is actually a benefit for us because we can get cheaper resources in that later season. We need to be upgrading our project plan in all scenarios, in all aspects, to make sure that any of those changes that we do in any of those sides are then hence reflected back in all of the sides in the entire project. And I'm really a big fan of this triangle diagram because it makes for a very clear graphical, but we need to remember that it's not just triple constraints. It goes beyond time, cost, scope, because we've got quality, we've got risk, we've got resources, we've got communication, procurement. We've got all of these other areas that we need to integrate it into. Okay, so we've been talking about this whole concept of how are we doing, are we on track, how are we managing, how are we monitoring, and I'm going to pose a question here for you, and we'll just bring our poll up. So we've got our project. We're going to build 10 widgets in 10 weeks for $10,000. Current status is week 3. We're at $2,500. How are we doing? So go ahead and vote and see what you guys think. So we'll give it a few moments for some the votes to come in, and then we will broadcast the results. So go ahead and just click. You'll only see your own vote for the moment, and then we'll end the poll. Okay, we'll give it a few more moments. A few more people to get some votes in here. I want to get at least half of you voting. I know it's lunchtime, right? Making you work over lunch, how dare I? Okay, it looks like we've got seems to have quietened down in the polling. So I'm just going to end that poll and broadcast the results. I'm hoping you all can see that. Sorry, Ali, I didn't notice your question. He says, is this the end of week 3 or the start of week 3? It's actually the end of week 3. I should have been more clear on that. I'll make sure I update that for next time. We have a very savvy group today. 68% of you said, I don't know. And what I'd like you to do actually is just pop into the chat box for those of you who voted, I don't know. Why don't you know? Because I've got my project plan there. I've given you my status. 6%, 7% said ahead of schedule, 10% said behind schedule, under budget, and over budget. So we've got, 6, 10% kind of distributed across the other 4 areas because I said, are we ahead of schedule, behind schedule, under budget, over budget? And the answers that are coming in from the people who said, I don't know, is they're saying, what's been done so far? What's been completed? Need to know how many widgets have been produced. Don't know how many widgets have been created. Absolutely. You guys, this is a savvy group. You didn't fall into my trap. I was trying to lure you into my trap of, it looks like we're kind of under budget because, if we assume we're on schedule, we're looking at, one widget per week. It's $1,000 per widget. So by the end of week 3, and thank you for asking that question, I will actually update this scenario if I use it in the future to make sure we say end of week 3. 2,500, it looks like we're kind of, ahead of schedule or under budget. And that's what I was kind of hoping you would get into. So here's what we're going to do is we're going to tell you how many widgets have been created. And I'm going to open that poll up. So if you're going to go ahead and vote, and you've got the 4 classic scenarios: ahead of schedule, under budget, behind schedule, over budget, behind schedule, under budget, and ahead of schedule, over budget. So I'll let you guys all vote on that. Let's give it a few more moments before we close off the poll. Okay. So I'm just going to end poll here and broadcast the results. All right, let's take a look at what we got. No one said ahead of schedule and under budget, which is, oh, I'm sorry, we did actually have one vote there. So we got one vote for ahead of schedule, under budget, ahead of schedule, over budget. The vast majority, 73%, said behind schedule and over budget, which is the correct answer. So if we look at our project plan and one widget per week, $1,000 per widget, well, if we've only done 2 widgets in 3 weeks, we're behind schedule. Now, all of this is assuming that we have a linear flow. So when I use this scenario, I like to use a simplified scenario so that we can focus on the issue and the concepts and not get lost in some of the details. So when I use this, we assume, this is a linear flow. So we don't have the learning curve. Real world scenario, this might actually be on time or even ahead because the first couple widgets, learning curve, would take longer than the last ones, that kind of thing. For the purpose of our discussion, we'll assume a linear flow. So we had, one widget per week. We're at week 3. We should have 3 widgets. We've only got 2, so we're actually behind schedule. Now, as many of you said, when I asked about, how are we doing, you said, I don't know. Now that we know it's 2 widgets, well, if it's costing us $2,500 to produce 2 widgets, it's costing us more than $1,000 per widget. So now we get into the situation where we're actually running at about 0.80 of our CPI, which is 80% performance, which means these widgets are all costing me about 20% more than they should be. So, we're going to end up at around 12,000. It's actually 12,500 based on our current flow. And of course, real world, I would be digging into details here. Did I have an initial $500 expense that's then going to get distributed across the multiple widgets and it's going to kind of even itself out? Is it actually, $12.50 per widget, or, am I off by 500 because we had some waste and we're now tracking at 1,000 per widget, and things like that. So I would definitely be digging more into the details. But when I do this scenario, and then I cover up this piece here and I cover up the two widgets, I often get people come back and say, you know what, we're under budget. And it's like, really? Like, seriously, folks, we need to look at how much product we have done versus the spend. Now, we are definitely in an underspend scenario. By the end of week 3, we should have spent $3,000. So this can also be an indicator for us, because if we haven't spent the amount we expected to spend by the end of a particular reporting period, we would want to be asking the question, why? What's going on? Is this an indicator of something going off the rails? So, we look at that scenario and we've got so many indicators, so many things that can help us, see where we're at. We've got our work breakdown structure, which is really the foundational building piece. We turn that into our network diagram, our sequencing, which then turns into our Gantt chart, which is, one of these various activities happening, etc. By pricing these individual activities, I can now generate my S-curve and see what the cost of the project, the flow of money, is over time. Now, this last chart here is actually a reverse S-curve. So we see that right here is where the project ends. And we have that S-curve coming down in this area here, which is the exact same S-curve that we have over here. It's just being shown in a negative. So the idea of this chart here is that we start with a net zero. We spend a bunch of money, which means we dive into the negative. Then the product comes into production. And whether that's a product for us to sell, whether that's a product for us to be more efficient, we're gaining some sort of benefit back. And if we can monetize that benefit, if we can put a number against it, we can then plot it. And this point here is the break-even point, which is our payback period. So if we install this new machine, cost $1,200, we're making $300 per year, it's going to take us 4 years to get back to zero. Assuming that the product life goes beyond that, we're going to get into that whole profit side of things. So if we're building a large building, let's say, if we're creating some software, the question that we have now is, how long is the product life? What is my expected monetary returns based on how long is that lifespan? Keeping in mind, of course, we want to take into account maintenance issues, and what's going to be that return. And this is why when things go over budget. So if I take this part of the curve here and drop it lower because I went over budget. So if I go over budget, it pulls this down. Well, it's going to take this entire portion of the curve and pull it down. And if that gets severe enough, we could get into a net negative, which is where we don't want to go. Okay. So back to our opening thought, music and silence combine strongly because music is done with silence and silence is full of music. And that's what we want to be thinking about when we look in terms of what is happening from a project integration perspective, and how can we, balance those two so that we don't have too much silence, we don't have too much music, and what we do is end up creating some beautiful art. Okay, so I'm going to open up to questions, and I see that we have one from Ali. But can we not assess budget based on weeks rather than widget count? Maybe further in the project. No, you can't actually. And thank you, Ali, for asking that, because that's a really important point. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to back up for a second here. We're going to plan our budget based on weeks. Okay. And whether we're building widgets, whether we're building software, whether we're building buildings, it doesn't matter what we're doing. The planning of it, so we're going to create this S curve, and that is going to be plotted on weeks on time. But what's going to happen is if we are behind schedule, this curve is going to look like we're underspend because we haven't spent it yet, but we're going to be spending it in the future. So the whole curve gets displaced. Now, if we're ahead of schedule, it'll look like we're over because we're spending it early. So if we're ahead of schedule, our curve will kind of come in this zone in here, where we're actually kind of going early. And it'll look like we're over budget, but when we're actually not. Now, this can be a real issue because if it looks like I'm under budget, I may rebaseline, release money, and go, uh-oh, I actually need that money. Similarly, if I'm ahead of schedule, it looks like I'm overspending. I may be taking corrective action to fix that. And meanwhile, I don't need to. So I totally get what you're saying with the whole, employees not really familiar with the technology. But this is where we as project managers need to become the interface so that we can help people understand what that means. So in our scenario of our widgets here, if I have someone who's not really familiar with it and they basically just say, oh, well, look, we've got, we're at week, let me just, still learning the new technology. There we go. So we're at week 3. We've only spent $2,500. This is great. We're under budget. But the reality is the budget is not based on timeline. The budget is based on what you produce. So what we need to do is we need to link the budget to the widgets because we stop spending when we stop building. And whether we're building widgets, whether we're building software, whether we're building ships, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. We need to be thinking in those terms. Okay, and I know that is a kind of a fundamental shift because when I first got into this, I was in the same boat. I was thinking, yeah, we gotta look at the timelines and the money, which we do. But keep in mind the money is driven by what you create, not how long it takes, right? How long it takes is the flow of that money over time. Okay. So if you guys have any other questions, pop into the chat. Let me know. Thank you, Ali. That was a great question. I'm going to leave it open just for another few minutes because we are at 1 o'clock. We are at our time. Appreciate you guys' time today. And join us next month for the number 2 in our series of 10, which is going to be looking at the scope. Okay. My email address is there. My phone's there if you want to contact us, as well as the PDU. So thank you guys so much. I'm going to sign off now, and we will see you next time. And of course, as always, these are recorded. So if you did miss it today, which I know you're not hearing me when I say this, but if you did miss it today, we do have them recorded. We do that for all of our sessions. So if there's any other ones that you missed in the past you want to join in on, let me know. All right. Thanks, guys.